Prince William has just put Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, for that matter, to absolute shame. He gave a rather unprecedented interview recently that was not only well received, but was a masterclass in PR. In part because it didn't feel like PR at all. It didn't feel like an exercise in public image and branding and media contact. And at the complete opposite end of the spectrum, we have Harold and the Meg, who basically won't shush for nothing, who leap at every opportunity to have an interview so long as they can talk about themselves. And it always feels like it's just for the sake of talking about themselves. The contrast between Prince William's lighthearted interview and the kind of media appearances that Harry and Meghan tend to do is striking, and it highlights exactly why Prince William's approach is so much stronger for public image, for longevity, for his general media relations and what he puts out there as a whole, as a big picture, versus what Harry and Meghan have done, which has resulted in them looking like whiny babies and just so self-obsessed and also boring because they say the same stuff every time and it's always the same shtick and everybody's sick of it. It's clear that Prince William's strategy is far savvier and much more effective. And one of the big reasons why his interview and his general approach feels that way is because it definitely came across effortless. The whole interview and his interactions felt effortless and very human. This recent chat with Eugene Levy came across genuinely fun, very self-aware, and certainly unforced. And Levy was a great choice for this as well because he's known for his warmth and his subtle sense of humor, and he has his own likability that played well with William's charisma. William did share a lot more personal details and points of view. It didn't cross over into oversharing, and it definitely didn't have the tone of, look at how bad this was for me or how hard this was for me, even when he was talking about difficult subjects, like acknowledging that last year was the hardest year of his life and that, his family have been dealing with very serious things, as well as a lot of his personal thoughts and feelings like about Queen Elizabeth's passing and how much he misses her and his future that he's thinking about with the monarchy and whatnot. Big subjects. It still never felt like it was ever crossing over into self-pity or wallowing or trying to make it seem worse than it was. Like nothing of the sort. It came across very honest and engaging, and there was gentle banter. William was laughing at himself. These are perfect approaches that convey to the public a snapshot that shows his realness, his authenticity, that he is relatable, he's confident and comfortable within himself, and basically normal. Like the public perception of William with this interview in particular showed how normal he really is. And he didn't have to do it by telling us that he is authentic and that he is showing up authentically. The way Meghan has made it like a mantra in all her public appearances to tell us just how genuine and organic and authentic she is. No pesticides. Overall, Harry and Meghan's appearances, whether they be in print or in TV interviews or anything of the sort, feel intense and agenda-driven. There's undertones of grievances or even image control, with Meghan always clapping back at certain things. It always feels like there's ulterior motives. She's not just there to actually have a chat and answer the questions and be normal. No, she's there to make sure she hits a few talking points, identifies herself as authentic so that there's no questions of fakeness, that she reminds people of things that she thinks need to be corrected or that she thinks she disagrees or doesn't want associated with her image. Like the whole burning bridges and ghosting friends. She wants to make sure that she tells people that she's had real friends and she's a real mom. That sort of a thing. It comes across as disingenuous, her throwing those into an interview that don't really have a place for it. It didn't come up naturally in that way. She's choosing to share that information for a reason. It didn't feel that way with William because the conversation had a great flow and pace, and he didn't take any questions and pivot them into something else. He answered the questions that were asked and had a normal conversation that evolved, but he didn't pivot or hijack any of the questions the way we see Meghan do and Harry. And because they do that, the public feels that Harry and Meghan are way more inauthentic because of that habit. William's interview also showed a lot of growth as compared to Harry and Meghan, who are always looking back at past grievances. Prince William came across as comfortable, mature, forward-looking, as somebody who is evolving gracefully and who is changing and growing and learning and developing, which is refreshing and also what you would hope for and what we all hopefully are striving to do. So that also had a connection to the public, but it also showed more of William's character in a way that he didn't have to say it or explain it or be like, this is what I've been working on, these types of meditations and stuff like that, the way we saw Harry do with the Me You Can't See, for example, or in lots of his other interviews. William didn't spell it out, it just shows, it just comes through. Meanwhile, Harry and Meghan seem to always still be reacting. They're reacting to critics, the palace, the narratives, the commentaries about them, and it keeps them trapped in not only a defensive cycle, but in kind of this repeating, I'm always looking back at things. I'm always looking back and pointing at something that I didn't like that happened before and why it's still a problem for me today. Even Harry's court cases alone show that he cannot really fully look forward and focus on growth because he's still always focused on those old grievances. Even some of his recent press comments after he met with King Charles, which we're discussing in a separate video, even that alone is another example of always having to look back and stuck constantly with his perspective, looking back at things and throwing tantrums about them rather than really investing and shifting his perspective forward, which is the most beneficial thing he could possibly do. We see an example of how that comes through on camera, in an interview, in interactions in William. It's a very stark contrast. William also expertly leaned into humor and humility, which are two of the most likable public traits. His tone was light and charming, and it definitely let people see him as approachable. And as I said, just clearly comfortable in his own skin. Meanwhile, Harry and Meghan's interviews often circle back to things that they're complaining about from the past, claiming are huge deals and super painful for them, even though they seem like totally normal things to the rest of us or small potatoes to the rest of us. They're constantly looking back at criticisms and focusing on victimhood, even when in theory, if we were being completely objective, we could say that Harry and Meghan were well-intentioned in some of their grievance-driven interviews and commentary. It still leaves the audience, the public, the people watching these things or paying attention to these sort of spheres and Harry and Meghan's saga, still feel like it's a negative trajectory still. Even if they're trying to, if Harry and Meghan think that by continually mentioning these things, they're going to like drive change or something like that, even if they think that, or that they're like going to connect with people who feel the same way that they do and make them feel less alone. If we could theorize that they're trying to be genuine in trying to be helpful or well-intentioned in what they're doing by constantly focusing on grievances, it's still negative. It's emotionally draining to hear all the time and eventually gets boring because it's so repetitive. And it's definitely not uplifting. William's interview felt uplifting even though he discussed serious subjects. There was still hope. There was still optimism. There was still a common thread throughout there of this is a positive conversation at the end of the day. And I never walk away from Harry and Meghan's TV spots or interviews or articles or projects feeling that way. It's never uplifting. It's never like, oh, this was actually quite nice still at the end of the day or positive in vibe. No, it's never that way. Another problem that is very consistent with Harry and Meghan's media presence in general is that it often feels like a rebrand or a launch of something, a relaunch of Meghan's, 27th iteration of herself, that now she's trying to sell the nerd mom, or now she's trying to sell the super kind and thoughtful CEO boss mom, these types of things. There's always a lot of these descriptors of themselves in their interviews and in their public appearances. Even when they're just like having a talk, like the Time 100 thing, there's a lot of these trying to attribute certain things to themselves. and comments that come across like they are trying to basically sell you on a concept of themselves in some way, shape, or form, which of course doesn't feel very nice. The public doesn't like to be told what to think, and it also immediately sends up warning signs of disingenuous, ulterior motives. Why are they trying to push this narrative so hard? What's really going on here? It's kind of suspicious in a way. But William's interview didn't appear or feel like it had a hidden agenda at all. He doesn't open up very often. Like, he doesn't give very many personal interviews. We discussed this in the Diana Scheme video, which will be back in December. Because William is sparse in his media interactions himself, like, of course, there's like statements from the palace or, announcements about upcoming appearances or trips, but that's very like business level, that's work stuff. In terms of personal, really hearing from William himself, doing interviews that cover more personal subjects or feelings and thoughts and opinions like this one did, he doesn't do that very often, and so it really feels a lot more just genuine and authentic and giving insight into who he is and getting to know him a little bit better. If he was somebody who did these things all the time, like Harry and Meghan, then there's a lot more risk that you're going to contradict yourself, or people are going to be like, well, why are you saying this now? You said something else before. Has your opinion changed? Or are you just, which one is true? And this is something that Harry and Meghan struggle with their public image. But additionally, in part because he doesn't do it too often and because of his approach, it didn't feel like there was any sort of hidden agenda. He wasn't there to correct any sort of narratives, and he didn't get into anything of that sort. He didn't like nitpick headlines from the press or commentaries or opinions or unpopularity the way Harry and Meghan do. He didn't do any of that. In fact, it was perfectly packaged, and it was something that I think is going to help him for years to come in terms of people feeling more connected to him because he is a little bit more quiet in his public image, which makes sense. I mean, I think he has the right to, and it's smart as well. When you keep a little bit of that mystery there, that is something Queen Elizabeth was very smart with, then it allows people to get excited for the times that they do hear from you, and it means a lot more when they do hear from you. So this interview has certainly enhanced his public standing by surprise, not by force, not by trying to convince people to like him and working so hard to constantly control every single headline and narrative and commentary. No, he's just relaxed. It seemed like he was having fun. He's doing his job, and this was a nice surprise. It was like a treat to get to hear more from him on a more personal level, and it was just really well done. He wasn't forcing anything. Harry and Meghan, their media efforts, especially things like Oprah and Netflix, but even more recent interviews, are often coming across like image rehabilitation projects, like trying to force certain narratives, force the media to like them, which invites fatigue from the press and the public, as well as cynicism. And as I said, Prince William's team, I mean, the whole Wales family team, but really, I mean, I think the monarchy as a whole stays rather famously tight with media access. And as I've said, that's a good thing. So when they do allow a public moment like this, an interview, something of this nature, it is calibrated for maximum positive impact. And because we are not fatigued by media presence, it felt spontaneous, it felt authentic, it was a pleasant surprise, but it also surely was relatively controlled and managed behind the scenes, which reduced the amount of risk involved. He was able to be more thoughtful about the questions, about how he showed up. He was surely feeling more relaxed because it wasn't like there was going to be a bunch of surprises and it was like super chaotic. It was surely still fairly controlled, and questions were probably screened ahead of time, but William did answer them in a way that didn't feel rehearsed. And we don't always see that from Harry and Meghan. It often feels kind of rehearsed. It also felt somewhat strategic in that there was a good balance of questions, of things that people are actually curious about, things that are meaningful and insightful in terms of William's character and how he thinks and what his priorities are and what really matters to him, as well as some other more in-depth questions that are a little bit more current and whatnot. With Harry and Meghan, it feels like there's zero strategy besides trying to push their narratives, clap back, sell an image. And because of that, it often feels like emotion is the overriding strategy. And they overshare, and it results in backlash and inconsistency. For example, they criticize the media while they use it, or they contradict things that they've said in the past. And that's a combination of lack of strategy, letting their emotions control what they say, and take questions and hijack them because they have a totally separate agenda to what the interview's purpose is, like we saw with Meghan in the Bloomberg interview or Harry with the Guardian interview. And another reason for that is because they have just so much. They're oversaturating the media space, and their public image and press relations are so heavy and constant that there's very little chance that they won't be contradicting something they previously said, because they say stuff all the time. And it's without good strategy, and it's with allowing those emotions and ulterior motives and other agendas take priority over what would be most intelligent. And part of William's strategy in this interview, or William's team's strategy with this interview, was surely to help people see a little bit more of William as a human, his humor, his warmth, but also to support his image as a modern and dutiful future king. So it had a great balance between the two, and keeping it focused on those sorts of subjects and sort of themes allowed the interview to be maximized in terms of its effect. He's showing that he can evolve with the times. He can joke with a comedic legend while staying within the bounds of royal decorum, which is skillful and showed William's ability, his neuroplasticity, his dynamic personality came through. His balance of intelligence and personality was perfect and highlighted well in this interview. And although Harry and Meghan are no longer royal, for example, they're no longer working royals, their interviews and media presence and the way they approach it undermines the royal titles that they cling to. Not to mention the hypocrisy of criticizing the monarchy and family members and whatnot while using titles to build their brand ventures. It all appears so self-focused and hypocritical, and therefore it erodes public goodwill towards them. Meanwhile, this seemed to bolster public goodwill towards William and his family. And so although this felt like a very personal interview and William spoke about personal matters, opinions, and feelings, it came across like he actually had important things to say and share that were worth hearing. It was worth our time to listen. He wanted to convey certain messages, sure, but that wasn't what the entire interview was oriented around. And he never, like I said, hijacked a question, took some random question, and then turned it and went down a totally different path just because he needed to check this off his list of things to say, the way we see Meghan do quite often. It also didn't feel like he wanted to sit down and talk about himself, even though he was talking about himself quite a bit. It didn't feel like he was there to talk about himself. He was asked questions about himself, which he answered, but there was also a lot of other things discussed that were bigger than himself. And he wasn't sharing his personal views for no reason. For Harry and Meghan, it almost always feels like they're talking about themselves just for the sake of talking about themselves. It's their favorite thing to do, we have found. That's it. That's the whole story. It's just self-obsession with the Sussexes. There's no real reason to rehash things from 10 years ago or 5 years ago, or things that you talked about in a last interview. There's no reason to reiterate something that you talked about in the previous podcast you were on, Meghan, but she does it constantly. It's this repetitive, cyclical round of narratives that they're trying to push that they want associated with their identity. And that is a huge reason why their media presence and their popularity is just annoying and is plummeting, respectively. The same cannot be said for William's interview or his public image. His popularity is growing. He is getting higher and higher approval ratings, and I'm sure that this interview will be one that bolsters all of that. If you missed it, I will see if I can link it in the description box, but if not, you can surely just search for it. Give it a watch. It was a really good show. Thank you for joining me today. I hope you have a very happy day ahead, and I will see you next time. Bye.